Hi, I'm Dr. Gordon Ressler, the president and founder of Robots in Space. And if you want to get the latest in space technologies and business, listen to the Cold Star Project.
This show is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be what is termed professional advice. The Cold Star Project is proudly presented by the Operational Excellence Society. Cold Star Tech is a supporter of the OPEX Society, and Jason Gannigan is a member of its board of advisors. Talk with us at Cold Star Tech to find out more about the OPEX Society and what we can achieve together in your organization, or just visit opexsociety.org. Thanks for joining us for today's show. Today I'm really excited to introduce Yan Song to you. Yan is a systems thinker, which is a thing that I'm learning about. Systems thinking is very different than the analytical process improvement type of approach that I was taught. It's fascinating as an operations management guy. I was never taught about Russell Lakoff or anything to do with systems thinking. And so well past the age of 40 now, I'm having to learn this stuff. And it's a completely different perspective. Yan works as an executive at a Fortune 500 company. Would prefer to have him on as a private citizen, and he'll be doing a series with us because, man, guy's got a lot of great ideas. Every time I talk to him, it's an uplifting, enlightening experience. I really enjoy it, and I hope that you enjoy our talk as well. Today we're going to be digging into culture. You probably know that culture is incredibly important to me. I do not believe that you just let that thing develop by accident. I think that's crazy. And that anything you can do to help engineer it to turn out the way that you want is super helpful. And so what we're going to be discussing today is Yan's thoughts on operationalizing cultural development. So building it into your day-to-day operations so that your people work consistently at creating the culture that you want. And that is, an elevated culture that this isn't about sitting around a table drinking tea with our pinky finger rings in the air. What I'm talking about here is a supportive growth state where we're backing each other up and everybody feels confident in each other and feels that they can tell the truth. These are just some of the values that I think Yan would agree with me on, and I believe are really, really important to having a great organization and achieving operational excellence. I think it's very difficult to achieve operational excellence and that state of readiness that Joseph Paris talks about, founder of the OPEX Society and writer of the book State of Readiness. Without the right kind of culture. So, Yan, welcome. Let's begin with this. Our topic that we've chosen to begin with, we could talk about anything to do with like systems thinking and that, but culture, organizational culture is so important to both of us. I find a lot of founders don't ignore it or want to leave it to sort of randomly show up by happenstance, and that's terrible. Don't do that. But you've pointed out with this title you've offered, how can we, it's a 21st century challenge. So how can we solve this 21st century challenge of operationalizing cultural development? So not leaving it to chance or just, I hope that the values that I have that I don't actually talk about with my employees or anything like that suddenly seep into the culture. That's not going to happen. How can we operationalize this so that it actually occurs? So that's going to be our topic today. And I'm going to begin with this question. Yan, how important is organizational culture? It's nice to work at an organization that is pleasant, etc. But what do we mean by this in a sort of a measurable, rationalist, and maybe even an economic sense?
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for the invitation. By the way, it was pure delight that for you and I met, quite coincidentally. And obviously, I accept your invitation because I actually checked you out. So I actually went online and watched a few of your past interviews, and I felt it was really authentic and relevant to people's lives. So this is why I agreed to do this with you. Yeah, the title sounds, a little bit outlandish, to be honest with you, right? How do we operationalize cultural development, for all intentional purposes, as people say, we're in the middle of a cultural war. everywhere. So how do you, actually, where do you even start, right? So maybe a little bit background about myself would help sort of orient why did I even come to this subject, right? So why don't I worry about something else, right? So I was trained as, first of all, I was born, grew up in China, under a regime that was extremely suppressive at the time. And it looks like it's becoming so again, 30 years, 40 years later. So the things that people now hear from news about Xinjiang, those things were the kind of environment I lived in when I was growing up. So I had that experience, and then had an opportunity, went to United Kingdom to do my PhD in physical chemistry. So after that, I came to this country and worked, at University of Chicago for a while doing research. And then after a few years, I was doing essentially theoretical physical chemistry, and there was not, great job prospects. So I went into industry instead. So for the past, 25 years or so, I've been basically bumping around, from big corporation to big corporation, doing a lot, all kinds of things, right? Mostly related with change. And that's where, I came to this big, subject, because no matter what I do, right, whether it's implementing a huge, software application like SAP, whatever that is, or to try to improve an unit of operations, what just comes up and again is not technology. It's not even processes, which typically can be figured out relatively easily. It is culture. It is people's mindset, right? What people want, what people think is acceptable, what people think is desirable. That is really, if it's not pulling apart the organization, at least it's the biggest hurdle to any improvement you want to do. So that's what motivated me to say, okay, let's think about how to actually, do we really understand what culture is, right? And then if we think we have some ideas, then we can think about how do we, I call it nudge the culture in the direction that's perhaps more productive and harmonious, right? For human beings to live with and work with. So that's essentially sort of where I came to this topic. So I guess what triggered our interest immediately is, this Harvard Review article, right? I don't know if you wanted to get into this right away now.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up with the next question, but that's cool. So you have brought to my attention an HBR article on culture and operationalizing culture, and it's all right. It's all right. But when I read it, I was like, I don't know if I agree with everything 100% here, but I didn't tell you that. And then you came back later with a big brain dump of thoughts about what you thought about the article. And so we're going to share that article. It'll be linked to in the description or the comments, and go check that out. And then we're going to comment on it here. Yeah. So let's start with that then.
Yeah. So like I said, it was a great article, and on as I said, it's a vital subject that, what is holding back most business, I would say today, is culture. And, I don't care where you go, because I'm in business operations, I go to conferences regularly. And if you go to those operational excellence conferences, half the conference is about the culture change. Probably more than half, because that's what people are bumping against. I know there's all talk about AI, machine learning, all the things, right? And that's important. It's part of the equation. But by far, the biggest elephant in the room is culture. And so I absolutely, applaud that Harvard Business Review, sort of try to, focus, right, coordinate the conversation on this. But this particular article talked a lot about, the relationship between, employee motivation and productivity, right? So, I was trained as a scientist, right? So I look at things not just through the angle, say, oh, these things seem to be correlated, right? They seem to be appearing together, which is important to observe. But then, it's a big jump from correlation, something appearing together, saying one causes the other, right? So I think that's where our conversation started. The article was brilliant, pointing out the correlation between employee motivation and the productivity increase. But then it went on to assert that, there is a causal relationship between employee motivation and the productivity increase. And that's a big jump. I think you and I sort of look at it saying, do we really understand enough, right, to came to such a conclusion and go beyond that to sort of manage our operations to in this way, right? So I mean, and this is what operation is, right? How do you make something stick? Not just talk about it, actually do it. Then you have to get serious. If this relationship is real, then why not we do everything possible to increase employee motivation? Then if there's a causal relationship, the productivity will go through the roof, right? And in reality, in my experience at least, it's not that simple, right? So if you treat this as a causal relationship and try to operationalize your business that way, the chances are it will backfire on you, because the relationship is not linear, not strictly causal.
Right. Yeah. The HBR article tries to quantify and apply a scale, and we'll get into a bit of that. But if we go back to 2016, I spent most of that year. My main client was a Dutch change management professional who really focused on co-creation. That was his big thing at large tech companies, 1,000 people or more. Typical operational excellence society focus, right?
Yeah.
And I learned a ton from him. And you'll see, if you look at one of my kind of crappy older websites that I don't share around a lot, but keep up for content's sake, I have an article and a video on there about you have a people problem, not a technology problem, when it comes to this sort of change problem. And I updated that a couple years ago for an early episode of the Cold Star Project, this show. and it's stuck with me ever since, right? That whatever you think is interfering technology or something, go search around, and behind that, you're going to find this people issue, the culture, the mindset issue. So that is another of the many reasons why this discussion is so important. So can you, Yan, talk a little bit about what we mean by organizational culture in a definition sense for you, and then we can move on maybe to what operationalizing that means.
Yeah, I think there's a very good actually definition in this Harvard Review article we just sort of discussed. They said culture essentially is the operating system of an organization, right? Which sort of give you some sense what culture is, right? It's not a technical term. It's essentially everything that sort of almost like dictate how we as humans function, right? If we're hungry, food became the priority, right? That's part of the culture. Basically, sort of what drive us to spend our energy, focus, prioritize, right? To really, to what's important for us. That's what culture is. I mean, academically, I define this as it's the totality of our organized consciousness. I mean, that sounds a little, too academic to people, but really it's all we know, right? All our knowledge and all we actually know implicitly, right? Our habits, right? Our traditions, our rituals, the part of life that we don't even think about it, but we're doing it, right? That's culture. So, so that's, to me, is what culture is. And in a business context, right? There's a lot of things we do in business, not because we have thought carefully about it, it's because it's always been done this way, right? So let's say you get promoted today to a department head, and what are you going to do? You're going to spend a year, redesigning, putting it on drawing board. You don't have the luxury, okay? Your job and first job is to keep things running. Otherwise, you're out of here. So a lot of things, and what do we rely on? We rely on culture. And by the way, there's a reason why the culture was in the first place, right? It's been tested, okay? It may be slightly out of date now, but it has worked in the past.
Right.
Otherwise, it would never have become a part of our culture. So when we, there's a tendency sometimes people became hypercritical. But I would say before you become critical, you really need to be compassionate. You need to understand what that culture comes from. Even though you think it's bad or whatever, you need to understand where it came from. And I guarantee you, at one time, it has served organization, human beings well. Otherwise, it would never have existed. So if we start from that, I think, sort of have a common language and starting point with people, so that people become less defensive, right? A lot of those things can become very polarized in a hurry, and I think that's one of the challenges we are facing as a country, as a race, right? As a species, today, is that we became so opinionated and sort of forgot somewhat where we came from. And I always found, if you want to develop a healthy and productive relationship with people, you always have to start from where people came from. So I don't know if that gives a satisfactory answer to your question, what is cultural, but I'm sort of,
it's like a box. It's like a box, and with all these values and experiences and perspectives in it, and we fall back on it to help us not think and make decisions. More on autopilot. People are far more robotic than they care to admit, which is something that I will say and keep saying.
I know we have to. If we're not, we have to stand zero chance to survive.
Right? Okay. I mean, because of the time between stimulus and response and what might be coming at you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even as a scientist, right? I hope people don't mind me saying that as a scientist, right? How come we have a DNA? Right? There wasn't DNA, at the time of Big Bang, right? We get organized. This is how we survived. And you think we need to think about our DNA before we're making it? Too late. I'm sorry. So, in that sense, most of our lives are very robotic, and there's no shame to it.
Okay.
That's how nature works.
Some must be.
That's how nature works. What we rearrange, change, manage is teeny little bit of what nature already evolved, right? Yes, we had part of it. You mentioned earlier co-creation, right? Yeah, we have a role to play, but that role cannot be exaggerated.
Okay.
Otherwise, we became such a egocentric and opinionated, and that's how we got into the polarization mess, because then suddenly we think we are right, we're the only person have the right opinion. In fact, that's far from true.
Yeah, but the concern is if you are too robotic and never reflect upon your culture and see if there's any part of it that we can adjust, you'll stay in that robotic mode, and your courses of action that you believe are open to you will be cut off. They will be very limited because of well, this is the way we do things around here. Anything else is not normal or just inconceivable. we won't even think to do it, right? And
I'm sure we'll get into this later series, right? I mean, then we're talking about human development, right? So yes, we are robotic in a large sense, but there is a developmental element, and that is a vital element, which that's the element made us different from other species, right? Made us uniquely human. So when I say we're largely robotic, I didn't mean diminish that, but we need to acknowledge that. Otherwise, once again, we're sort of have a head with no body, and that does no good, right? So before we became so headstrong, we need to fully bodied. So acknowledging that a large part of life is very robotic is just acknowledging we have a body.
Okay, but I'm also thinking about certain stimulus or stimuli will come in, and we will filter that according to our own perception and beliefs and values and things like that, and sort of spit out a result, which maybe we get angry, right? Or we go eat some ice cream or go for a walk or something like that. And this occurs without us thinking about it. Right?
No.
It's just an automatic response. But then in the anger situation, we might tend to blame that other person. And say, yeah, it made me angry. Well, no. your perceptive filters of that stimulus and how you interpreted it autonomically, I guess, made you angry. And so this is and then you've got these complex interactions of all these people coming into an organization to work, and I kind of picture this like the buzzing molecules, right? Bumping off each other and little explosions happening, and it's all kind of an autopilot, right? If we're not careful. And so that's why a great reason about why looking at this tricky topic of culture in organizational development is so important. So let's get a definition out there then of what operationalizing cultural development means. What's our definition for this?
So, obviously, we'll get into something that, right? So to me, as a scientist, right? So as we described, I mean, it is just natural that people were born into, different environment, right? Like when I was born, I was in, under communist, rule. And then later on, I moved into different environment, and our environment changes, we change, right? I mean, I can't imagine I'll be talking to you if I, was still in China. So who made those different environment? People, right? So then we're talking about development, right? Because it is possible, yes, we're largely robotic, yet we can create a vastly different environment culturally, right? And once again, those just don't fall from sky. People did that. And that's development in the basic sense. That's the definition of development. So yeah, there's some randomness or some luck. There's some, things like that. Or what happens if, the British actually put down the uprising, and America never got, founded. I mean, that was possible. So so it was not a totally determinate, but there's certainly patterns, right? Principles and lessons that we can learn from those large cultural development patterns. And that's what I mean by cultural development. I mean, back to today, right? As I said, we already talked about, if you ask any business executive, go into any sort of large business conferences, half the topic is about culture. How do we get a handle on managing our culture in such a way that we spend less energy fighting each other, right? More towards a direction that will actually make our business stronger, right? So that's the discussion. And as a scientist, I think we have no better way of guiding ourselves than developing a science of cultural development, right? So I was trained as a physicist, and right. So we're very familiar with Newton's laws, Einstein's theories. I mean, physics would never have developed the way that it has without the guidance of those theories or those models, right? And I believe human culture is the same. Yeah, it is order of magnitude more complex than physics. Okay, so but it is still natural phenomena, right? So this is where I wear my scientist hat, right? So I can look at ourselves, looking at the human society, look at our ugly politics very objectively, saying this is just the phenomena that we're observing. So what kind of theory, right, scientific model we can develop in order to help us better understand it and deal with the challenge we have, and perhaps cultivate the way the future development might take place. And that's what I mean by cultural development. And in my experience, there have been just stunning progress made in recent decades in the social sciences that has shed light on how humans actually develop, which wasn't there before. So while everyone was crying, saying, "Wow, everything is crumbling down," I think there's some extremely exciting science going on. It's just not on the on the front page of TVs or social media. That's all. But I've been thrilled to witness the progress, and this is what I mean when I say we need focus on cultural development is unguided by science, and that's what I mean. I'm not claiming that science is quote 100% ready to guide us. In fact, I think we're at very early stages of developing that science, but it's a very promising starting point. And besides, I don't see any better alternative to in the first place, right? So I always use analogy, right? Before you complain that, why do you feed me this food? Well, if there's no food, guess what? It's still better than no food.
Right. Okay. Well, and for those who have not worked with large organizations, and they might be going, well, why is this important? Well, think of the example of maybe having a sales department of just 20 salespeople. It's not a tremendous number of people, but it's significant. And say you implement a new CRM software to keep track of customers, potential customers, pipeline stages of sales development and that. If you don't manage this culture development thing and the managing of that change, you're going to get resistance, and there's going to be a range, right? And we could probably do it in a bell curve, but some people are going to adopt it without too much trouble, right? They'll adapt, and then at the other end, there will be people who actively resist and try and sabotage that program, and talk behind everybody's back, whisper, about how terrible this thing is, right? And then in the middle, you'll have people who kind of slowly adopt it, dragging their heels, and they'll be putting their leads into their own Excel spreadsheet instead of the central CRM where nobody can see it, and it's on their computer, their personal computer, not out in the cloud. So really nobody else can access it. So if they die or quit or something like that, where's the data? I've seen people take leads and put them on Post-it notes and stick them under their keyboard. They get lost.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sharing this just to give you an example to your listener of the nonsense, of the obfuscation, of the resistance that can happen as you're just trying to do a simple thing, which ought to be seen as something positive for the organization. Hey, we're going to implement this new software. And 24-year-old Jason would have demanded, as a high and mighty plant manager from on high, just do it. He wouldn't have cared about your feelings. Now, 46-year-old Jason is very nice. learned a lot, right? And also wants to get everyone to kind of go with the flow, right? So I would come to them now and begin with a discussion of, hey, we're looking at doing this. What do you guys think we can do to help speed up the implementation of this? What are the problems you see in implementing this? And I would get some people to appoint themselves as part of that implementation team so that they were bought in. And that's the co-creation part of it, right? And I don't have to be the dictator and insist on anything. But okay, so that's the idea of operationalizing cultural development, building in what Yan is talking about into the day-to-day operations so that it just happens, almost robotically, so that we don't have to think about it. It's built in there. But let's find out what some of the levers and dials of how this would work are. The HBR article lists 3 things: play, purpose, and potential.
Yeah.
I didn't think they were complete, and I see the issue of this isn't a one-to-one, I push this button and they do that kind of as a result thing. It's not a surprise to me, but compensation was not an issue either. It was not one of these 3 things, right? It didn't matter how much money you made, you needed to feel good about it. So I'm curious, play, so how much fun are you having? A purpose, are we on a task that matters to us? Potential, where could this lead us? Are those good enough? And what is missing? What would you like to see included in there as levers and dials of organizational development?
Yeah, that's where I think I depart from where that HBR article thesis is. I think those things they names are secondary factors actually driving culture. And as we know, right, if you act on the secondary things and leave the primary things untouched, it's like you're squeezing balloons, right? You squeeze here, it pop up here, and that kind of thing. So I would honestly, pick a different starting point, and I didn't just do this, out of blue. So once again, because I've been, motivated looking this, so I've been reading a lot in the literature, right? What scientists have done in this field, and there being a rich literature about how to describe, how to manage, different cultural phenomena, and we can get into some of that. I don't know if it's appropriate to mention some of that today, right? Just as example, there is a he passed away a few years ago. So there's a Harvard professor by the name of Chris Argyris, and he was, not just armchair philosopher. He actually consult a lot with, major corporations, small businesses. So he essentially developed a model he called action science. So he doesn't start with a big concept. He starts by observing how people behave, right?
Yeah.
And what are the consequences of those behaviors, right? So if people play political games all the time, well, the consequence is you can't make a very good decision as a company, as a department, as an organization, as a small business, right? So then he asked the question, why do they do that? So he developed, certain social models about human action and human cognition and human emotions. I think, to me, that's a much better starting point than looking at how much time people spend on play, how much time spend on those kind of things, which are the consequences, the effect of those primary drivers, I call it. So if we're going to explore that, I would rather spend time on some of the I would consider more relevant work.
More root cause.
Yes.
And this just struck me. Thinking about the difference between analytical thinking and systems thinking. Analytical thinking assumes that you can know everything and it chops up things into pieces. And then you start learning about systems thinking, which I was not taught as an operations management guy.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but they really stuck on process, right?
Yeah.
And I'm only finding about this now, like in my 40s. I feel like, oh, why? But systems thinking assumes you can't know absolutely everything, but you're trying to get stuff to fit together.
Yeah.
But the advantage of systems thinking is that you can, I think, more easily discern the purpose of the function of the system you're looking at, whatever it is you're looking at. Whereas analysis, by taking everything apart, you'll never find the purpose of what it is, like taking apart a car, as Dr. Akoff would have said, right? You're not going to find out that that's a transportation device, and the reason that it was made with a certain number of seats was the family size in America of that era. But with systems thinking, you can kind of figure out what its core purpose is. So what the question that popped up is, when we look at play, purpose, and potential, we're chopping up, we've got 3 different buckets here, right? That we're carrying around, trying to sort of balance in that. That sounds suspiciously analytical to me. So I have a very vague question that maybe we'll be able to form better for a future episode. But
yeah,
where does
the
systems
analogy
thinking lead us, right? Where does systems thinking lead us when applied to cultural development?
Yeah, the analogy I use is, the difference between analogy and biology is one is dead, the other one is alive, right? So you can dissect a swan, right? You can look at the different part of the swan, get very detailed knowledge about it, and that is necessary, right? So anatomy certainly is a branch of science. We can learn a lot from that. But there's no way you can understand the quality of a live swan, right? By dissecting the dead part. And that's essentially difference between, let's say, a purely objective, process analysis, statistical driven analysis like Six Sigma, right? And the kind of cultural development model and theories we just talked about, right? You can call that system thinking, but then there are all kind of different versions of system thinking. So I'll be a little bit careful there.
Okay.
So what we're talking about here is essentially go one level above those factual statistical analysis to what is the organizing principle that made those different parts function organically. So we're going from basically the anatomy of the swan to the life quality of a swan. So we're not saying those anatomies are useless, valuable, should be discarded. Not at all, right? We need that knowledge, but we're going to go one step further and inquire about the organizing principles that made those different parts of anatomy into a live swan.
Okay, that helped me a lot, your
Yeah.
answer there. The other thing too is that the swan cannot really be separated from its background, its environment, right? Whereas analysis plucks the thing out and chop, 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 chop. Yeah, I can take a frog and like Akoff said, throw it into the blender and then examine the cells, but that's not going to tell me a whole lot about why the frog is the way it is. All right, yeah. So we just talked about the idea of stepping back or up a level to understand the organizing principle of cultural development more. What does that mean then, as far as the levers and dials? If it's not play, purpose, and potential, what should we be looking at?
Yeah, I think what we would do in terms of series is I think we should review someday, like I said, the work that's already been accomplished in recent decades, some brilliant work. I think that's, we're all standing on the shoulder of giants, right? So nobody, not even Einstein, can invent physics by himself, right? He's standing on the shoulder of. So I think that's necessary. It's not just paying tribute. It's actually necessary, because you don't become Einstein overnight, right? You have to sort of build it up step by step. But in terms of giving you how I look at things, right? In the long distance, and it's not actually that long. It's hit home very quick. I think there are two fundamental things that makes human beings tick: power and love. Right? What do we love? And how do we get it with the power we have? That's fundamentally the two. If you think about the DNA, there's two strands, right? Sort of tied together.
Yeah.
This is the two strand of how human culture develops, is by power and love. And it evolves. It's not static. It's like, you gave example early on. A 24-year-old Jason loves different things.
Yes.
From 46 years. So how did it become? What is the pattern? Why can't Jason not be like this? When he was 24. Right? There's a lot of reasons. I mean, I think it's unrealistic to help Jason at 24 became maturity of the 46. But can we make Jason more mature at 40? 35? I think that's entirely possible.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about. Human development is looking at those patterns and say, how do we best help people, ourselves included, right? Be developed in a more productive and happy manner. And what fundamentally drive that are those two things. Power and love.
Yeah.
And at different stage of life, we have different powers and we have different loves.
Right.
How do they interact? And how does this interact with the environment?
Yeah.
That's the main strand, right? So I think we should go through the different stages and see how those power and love interact and sort of grow. And then I think we'll begin understand culture.
Okay. Well, I'm very interested for you to send me whatever you want to about discoveries in social science in the last 20 years, because I've wanted to pay attention, and in the past I have, to that sort of thing, especially for writing fiction. But other than like Claire Graves' spiral stage dynamics and ego development stages and that kind of thing, which I find pretty useful.
Yes.
I haven't seen much else out there. I've seen a couple things, but that really summed up a lot for me And I didn't actually know that you knew about that until I just mentioned it just now for our listeners.
Oh yeah, Spiral Dynamics
yeah.
was one of the foundational
Mm-hmm.
work that I've
Mm.
really enjoyed. Yeah,
Okay,
Claire Graves.
good.
Yeah, and her
Well, we can have
students.
a conversation about that at some
Yeah.
point. Great. Okay. So that's our kind of our pyramid and our purpose, what we're focusing on here. The HBR article talks about this relationship, and we've mentioned, is it correlational or causational, between company process and employee motivation. And they give a minus 100 to a plus 100 scale and attribute this relationship to a 50-point motivational score shift, depending on how good or bad it is. Do you think that's ridiculous, or is it reflecting something that's actually happening, but just not the way they're thinking it does?
I think the correlation is real, but it's just not causation.
Mm.
So meaning, yeah, it's interesting, but there's nothing you can do about it.
Ah.
Because what are they gonna do? Okay, let me drop everything, just focus on process.
Mm.
I guarantee it wouldn't work. So
Right.
this is why, I mean, as a scientist, we need to observe those correlations, right, as a starting point. But then we've got to model it so that we have a model of a causation before we can do something about it.
Right.
And I just don't see the factors named in that article can help us develop a useful model. No.
Mm-hmm.
This is my opinion, of course. I mean, I could be wrong, okay?
I agree with you, because to me, process is too low a level to attack the problem at.
Yes.
And it's fiddling around with the nutsy boltsy, almost, you need to get into the realm of conceptual, not physical, I think, at this point. Yeah. So you'd end up wasting a lot of time down there moving particles around and not really getting anywhere, right? You shift a lot of things, but not get
you're dealing with symptoms, right? Not dealing with root cause.
Right.
And
Yes.
and that's the case there. Yeah.
All right. And if anybody wants to find out more about the symptoms versus problem, root cause, I've got an episode about that on this show called Symptoms versus Problems. And the bell tower example, where I get into a slightly gruesome example of how this works. But it also makes the point very clearly, where if you try and solve every problem in this particular situation I'm talking about, it becomes ridiculous very quickly, where you see you're not getting anywhere. So, okay, yeah. And so what can leaders do then now to help initiate and support this kind of change? What methodologies or tools have we got? Or just even an approach, I guess. You've talked about compassion, for example, walking into something and not going, oh, what a bunch of idiots. They're so devolved and stupid and whatnot. I'll help them, which is not going to get you very far.
Yeah, I think the typical executive today, their challenge is, how to sort of keep things going, right? Because it's literally, sort of a war zone in a lot of business today, right? The people I know routinely spend, 60, 70 hours a week, just keep things going. So it's a very difficult situation for most of the folks. And I would say, I mean, even then, I mean, there are people who recognize, right, the path to a better place is not necessarily to spend more hours, right? Hopefully, you can just put out enough fires, and then eventually it would quiet down. Certainly, our environment, the operating environment, fluctuate, goes up and down. So sometimes it's worse than better. But in general, I think, if they really think about it and reflect on it, and I heard this from many of them, is that, there has to be a better way, right? It just, earlier we talked about the difference between the parts and organizing principles, right? when, people start burning out themselves by spending more and more hours, at a certain point, I think if they are wise enough, they just have to, conclude it's something not right the way they're doing it. Okay. And you just needed to find a different operating principle, whether it's the way you organize your business or the way you treat people, all right, the way you select leaders, the way you yourself operate. That's usually a big part of the problem. So, what I think we could help is to offer that I call the mirror, right? I mean, essentially, I do a lot of this work with a senior executive is put up a mirror in front of themselves so that they can see, that's what's happening, right? And that mirror obviously needed to be an educated mirror, and that's where the social sciences we mentioned comes in.
Okay.
And that's, if I have to say, if anyone, your listeners want to actually improve something, I think the first step is to get some self-education. See what different options are there, right? Once again, there's stunning social science, work out there that could help them if they're interested, right? So, and then once they start seeing pattern, I always say, think top down, but execute from bottom up, right? You can't change things overnight. But if you see a pattern, now you can start planning to change one piece at a time. And you'll be amazed. I always advise people, right? If you can improve things, let's say 5-10% a year, you're making astonishing progress. Anything bigger than that is probably too good to be true, and maybe even worse. It could trigger a revolution that will swallow you up.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you shouldn't think revolutionary, right? This is why think top down, think big picture, have big goals, big ambitions, but then execute carefully. And that this combination is, my golden rule. Always think top down and execute incrementally bottom up.
Okay. Yeah, I know from my own running my own business experience, if you'd gone back 2013, Jason was running a sales training consultancy, and I was booked wall to wall.
Yeah.
I mean, I do calls whenever somebody was sending money my way. Monday through Friday, Saturdays, Sundays, whatever needed, and I was tired. And I also found that with 30 clients, I was split in so many different directions trying to support every single one of them that I couldn't really help any of them very well. And so this business, I'm not at the center of it at Cold Star. I'm out on a spoke. The hub is somebody very different from me to keep things managing and running. And that leaves me free to do this. I don't let people book appointments on my calendar a couple days of the week because I know how important that deep work is, and I need to set aside time for it. During mornings, I know that about myself, right? If I don't come in at a Russell Akoff lecture or something like that in the morning, I'm just not going to absorb it. I could find the time at 8 p.m. and press the play button, but it's just going to wash over me and I'm not going to understand it or retain anything, right? So knowing this about yourself, at getting control of your schedule, one of the things I do with founders I'm working with is get them to take control of their calendar. I find all of them are trying to do too much. You cannot solve every problem that comes your way. You can't. There'll always be more. So you have to find out what you're doing, where your times actually get sucked, move tasks around and batch them and organize them by your energy levels and your Like I'm good at writing in the evening. I do creativity work in the evening, right? And sort of grunt work during the day. But finding these things out about yourself and being able to reorganize and use your time and energy better makes an enormous change. So when you talk about the mirror and reflection and whatnot, that's what I would call some of the bottom up side of it, held up by some basic ideas like you don't have to do it the way that you've been doing, or you don't have to try and get involved in every fight that you're invited to, sort of thing, right? And I've run into so many executives at big companies and small who have not encountered those simple ideas yet, right? Of hey, I can design my own life here. Now I've talked to executives at Fortune 500 companies that will remain nameless who privately, they will never get on my show, and I wouldn't let them because they'd probably get fired for it. Shared their opinion about their company culture, and it's bad.
Yeah.
It's a negative, fearful, look over your shoulder, backstabby work environment that
Yeah.
you know, if sometimes senior management can be, or leadership can be scared of the idea of implementing this kind of change. How can a leader discern what kind of culture they're in now and sort of rate it against other possibilities? Because again, they may have, what if you worked for the same company for 20 years and that's all you know? And you're locked into, well, every business is like this, right? Only it's not. And what can they do about getting senior management or leadership to support that kind of change?
Actually, my advice would be don't do that.
Okay.
Because I've tried that early on in my career.
Yeah.
I've worked for 7 different companies.
Mm-hmm.
And early on, the primary reason I would leave a company was exactly that, right? I've tried to get senior leaders to change, quote, quote, right? See things my way and do things right, quote, quote. And then they wouldn't. And then after a while, I just leave, right? And hoping that we'll find some greener pastures. and so later, at 24 years, Jason, became 46, and he wised up a little bit. Yeah. And what I saw is there's not big differences between the 6, 7, all those are Fortune 500 companies that I worked for. Not much difference. And that's when, I recommend that book, right? Actually, I went back to my bookshelf and pulled it off of my bookshelf. It's written by the famous physicist Carl Sagan. It's called Shadows of Our Forgotten Ancestors. So, when I first read it when I was a graduate student, not a graduate student, but a researcher, postdoc, I didn't appreciate it. I was like, all this ancient stuff, what does it have to do with my life now? Right? We're long beyond those, sort of almost barbarian stages. What I really appreciated since I, working in a corporate was that we're far from beyond those stages. The organizational life is still very much dominated by those very, very rudimentary human love and desire and power. And what I found is, instead of resenting them, like I did early on in my career, and hoping, find a better place, quote, quote, less barbarian, more enlightened, it did not exist. So, does that mean that we have not progressed at all as a species? Not at all. there's huge progress, right? I quote some examples, everywhere. I mean, our life expectancy has doubled just from less than 200 years ago. I mean, think about it. Huge progress made. So how did that happen? Right? So then I have to basically accept this. As a scientist, I need to accept this is the fact. We can make progress even though the organizations we work within still feels very ancient. Right? So then I concluded it's me. The problem is me. I did not see reality in a crisp, accurate manner, right? I was too superficial. So that's what I would say, right? Stop trying to say, I can persuade my CEO, my VP, whoever your direct report is, to say things my way, and then we can start change. I think we need to look into ourselves first and recognize the genius in ourselves and find a way to enlighten ourselves and improve our life first and foremost. And by doing that, amazingly, you will find you will also start influencing and changing other people's lives. But you cannot do that without influencing, changing yourself first.
So trying to convince. So I go back again to my first plant manager job. My boss there, the general manager, was in his 40s and I was in my mid 20s. And he said to me, Jason, somebody's going to see you and pick you up to work for them, right? They're going to see the value, they're going to get it, etc. Right? And I waited. And all my 20s went by and my mid 30s, and it never happened, Jan. It never happened. nobody noticed me, and I was doing stuff. I mean, I've done a lot of civic volunteer work and done this, done that, but it didn't happen. And so finally I just had to come to the conclusion that I had to create the life that I wanted myself, that I wasn't going to hook my train wagon onto somebody else and get going. So,
well, I would say it might have happened, Jason, right? So someone might have, picked you up and sort of put you on a fast track, we call it, right? Just shoot up as a rocket. But that's not guaranteed, right? There's a randomness to it. And, and honestly, looking back, I wouldn't want that. Because once you're on that fast track, guess what? You lose yourself.
You get sucked into that culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, remember, I just mentioned, a lot of executives today working long hours, making a lot of sacrifices because they're on the fast track. I'm not criticizing them. Okay, not at all. They're actually making valuable contributions. But I'm just saying that's not all.
And it's what they wanted.
I would say that's not even the most important.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Well, let's finish up with this question. How else can things go wrong? And I've done this in the sales training field. What if I ask for sales training into my company as the sales manager or something like that, and it doesn't work, right? What do we do then? And I'm going to get blamed for this misimplementation or spending the expense and it not rewarding it and whatnot. What are the consequences if we make a misstep in our attempts to improve culture, and how difficult is it to course correct?
Well, after 25 years, I tend to tell people, right? If you have not been the target of a witch hunt, You're not worth your professional name.
Hmm.
That's just part of the game, part of the, human dynamics.
Mm.
And and I used to be very resentful, very bitter about this in my younger years. I put in all this effort, taking all those risks, did all this, and then just because the slight mistakes here and there, things that I can't even predict, now I became the bad guy, right? Witch hunt start. So I used to be quite a bit about this, and then, once again, once we develop, look at this whole thing from a cultural development standpoint, now I start understand why.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So another scholar I'm sure we'll go into is Robert Keegan from Harvard, right? Yeah, that's what humans do.
Right.
So they blame, they witch hunt, they find some way of rationalizing why things are not happening the way they want.
Yeah, I found myself on the wrong side of the organizational culture a few times, and been ejected out of that organization. Yeah.
So today, I no longer take it personally. Do I like it? No.
Huh.
But I no longer take it personally, and I take it as part of the risks that I take on as a change maker, right? So
it's a phenomenon. It's not a personal.
No.
Event.
I have to ask ourselves, okay, do you still want to do what you choose to do, knowing this is going to happen? My answer is yes.
Yeah.
So then we have to accept the responsibility, right? So managing that became part of the equation, part of the game plan, part of the strategy.
Okay.
So,
yeah, that's very valuable.
For those people saying, well, I'm okay with everything, but I don't want it to be blamed. If that's their condition, then they don't have a starting point. I'm just being very honest.
Right. Yeah, that's extremely valuable feedback. and I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah, I mean, it does explain a lot of things that I've experienced where, you get on the wrong side of the culture and out you go.
That happens all the time.
And you can feel bad about being fired, right? And I see people posting about this on social media. Oh, I was made redundant or something, or the company let me go. Usually they'll try and spin it. We parted ways or something like that. But how you feel about it when you're by yourself is really the important thing. Is it going to gnaw at you and create that resentment, or are you going to go, well, if I'm a sports team, I'm going to win some games and lose some games, and losing doesn't feel great, but I'm not out of the whole structure, right? I'm still in the league, right?
And also, I think, sort of looking at it from the bottom barrel, right? So I think what is really important, and at least to me, is that what is the purpose of us doing this, right? So, and this is what I ask myself: why I choose to do this, not something else? So, what is the purpose, the meaning to me? And if I convince myself this what I choose to spend my life on, right? This is how I feel meaningful living my life. Then I'm willing to live with some of the collateral damages, right? And witch hunt is part of the collateral damage. And so that's how I reconcile this with myself.
Okay. Yeah. And on my end, I want to know the truth with capital T's. And if the whole society wants to be against me and say, no, this other thing, is the truth, or the opposite is the way they see it. But I know, no, this is the truth over here, the real behind the scenes truth. And I'm content with that. That's good enough. I can be.
Yeah, the way I use that, Jason, is that
Mhm.
you choose side with the universe,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
I feel the same way, right? You know, I have nothing against society,
Mm-hmm.
but I do understand society is part of the universe, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is feeding into something else? Well, I hope our listeners found this discussion useful. If you like this show, please go to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. That's something that I almost never mention, and I need to really plug that more. Very few people do that. They like the show, they listen to it, and they message me about it. But like, if you don't have 30 some odd reviews on a thing like that, a lot of guests even won't even pay attention to you, potential guests and that. So if you want to help the show, that is something you can do. I don't ask for money. We don't have sponsors except for the Operational Excellence Society, and that's not a monetary thing. That's more of a trade, and we support them. But I have to mark it as paid promotion on YouTube. I don't do a Patreon. I don't need it, and I don't want to be beholden to anyone for that reason. But it's been great to have you here, Jan. How can people connect with you? What is the way that you would like to be connected with them? What sorts of conversations would you like to have?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. So if you search under my name, Yan Song, you will find me. And I think this is how you and I found each other anyway. Or you know, yeah, that's the best way.
All right. Well,
Of course, they can always contact you, right? You know how to find me.
They can. This is true, and it happens. People do reach out to me and say, "Hey, how can I communicate with so and so who was on your show?" Well, I would love to do more with you with this. There's so many topics that we're able to go into, and this is a very, in my opinion, a high-level discussion. And I don't mean abstract by that. I mean elevating, right? It's going to get us somewhere, much more so than talking about real estate development or something like that, which I know about and could talk about, but it's not elevating, really. It's just mechanical. And I want to get beyond mechanical to root causes and energy and motivation and that kind of thing. So it's been great to have you here, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason. It's fun.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're interested in working with us at Cold Star Tech, here are some of the things that we can help with. There's a lot of people who talk about process, documentation control, attention to detail, all this stuff. We help organizations become true learning organizations. Remember, if something isn't written down or recorded in some way that's accessible, searchable, findable, it didn't happen. It might as well not have happened. So if you have two people who solve a problem, a serious problem in your organization, but they do so in isolation and nobody finds out about it, which happens all the time, then it didn't really happen, and nobody else can access that wisdom. So we unlock wisdom for your organization. We do a lot of things in the space industry. We have access to regulatory and legal officials who can help you, if you're a space industry founder, find out what areas of regulation and compliance do you need to be, working with, compliant with. And we find a lot of folks don't even know about some of these areas. They don't even know that they exist. Can you imagine how you're going to stumble and stub your toe and really screw up your organization's timetable if you don't know about these things? So come and talk to us. We've got great relationships with the right people, especially in the United States and in England, and we'll be able to help you with that. And so when it comes to process improvement, whether that's some sort of business documentation, business development roles, wow, have I seen some things in business development. You got founders out there who all they're doing is quoting on projects. This is a mistake. You are wasting your energy bidding on things that most of which you never even had a chance of winning in the first place. I've seen people bankrupt themselves bidding on everything, or bidding on only these high-end things and not realizing that you need to have a strategy so that this bidding process pays for itself. I mean, you got to learn how to screen here. And this is not something that they teach you in school. I had to learn it myself, so don't feel bad about it, but come talk to us about it, okay? So either it's on the business process side or the actual manufacturing of physical goods. that kind of process improvement, you can come talk to us. Can this be done faster, cheaper, better? And yes, most of the time it sure can, because people just do stuff, and the first person to invent the way of doing things is the person who gets to choose most of the time how things are done. This happens all over the place. I like to point out our traffic signals for automobiles are based on the way that they ran railway traffic 100 years before that. Okay, so, and this is key in the space industry right now, which is new, right? This is an area that I personally am interested in. How we figure out how to do stuff today is going to impact generations, because people are so easily locked into this is how we've always done it. And if you hear that at your organization, there's a warning bell. This is how we've always done it. You need to come talk to us at that point, okay? So reach out to us. It's easy to do. Just message me on LinkedIn or email me at jason@coldstartech.com. I want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.